The level that Richie's been playing against and with the efficiencies, it's not like he's a chucker. He's playing very efficient. And then being the best player on a team that got us to the Sweet 16, the only names that I'll even listen to that might be better than Richie are Ainge and Jimmer.
Hello and welcome to the Active Podcast Studio. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast where we talk about what you, the fans, are talking about. And today is a first. We've got a three-man crew today to talk some BYU hoops and March Madness. Tosh, Mackintosh, you already know. We've got Brian Swindlehurst joining us. Give us a little background on you, because I know you've coached at the high school level and the collegiate level. Let people know, what you've done.
Yeah, so I was a high school coach for a decade. I was a coach here in Utah, just at Timpview High School. I moved to Southern California to coach at a Santa Margarita Catholic under Jeff Reinert, who's the coach at College of Southern Idaho now. And then I really wanted to coach college, so I went to Westminster for a year, Division II here in Salt Lake, and then Salt Lake Community College for 6 years. And then you
guys won a national championship there.
We won a national championship at Salt Lake Community College, yes. And then I sold out to money, and I came over here to Active to work with Tosh. But I still coach for the Utah Prospects EYBL. So that's how I keep my foot in the game.
Let's make that as big as it really is. So that's the best AAU team in Utah for sure, and one of the best nationally. And so a lot of BYU players, a lot of top prospects that go all over. Brian coaches at the AAU level.
So you've coached Richie, you've coached Trey. We talked about this off camera.
Not Richie. We had Dallin. So Dallin Hall played for us. I got to work with Dallin.
Nice.
Trey Stewart's played for us. Trevin Nell, Brody Kozlowski. So several BYU players.
Yeah. So you know guys.
Yeah.
You know guys.
Yeah.
And it's funny that we've been wanting to get you on. At least I have pretty much all season, because you and I talk. We sit across from each other, for those that don't know, and so you and I talk basketball pretty much every week.
Yep.
And so it was just natural to get you on the show, and I've been wanting to get you on. So this is great, and I love that we're doing it after two of the best wins, at least in recent history, for BYU basketball, with BYU's win over Wisconsin and VCU. I did want to talk about BYU's offense to start, because I think. First of all, the Wisconsin game, Wisconsin's offense was also really good. And then coming up this week, BYU's offense is going to have to really win in a shootout against arguably the best offense in the country. What did you like about BYU's offense this week? And have you seen improvement from what we've seen earlier in the year?
I think, yeah. I mean, when you thought about this team early in the season, you thought, okay, it may take a bit for them to get going, right? There's obviously two, for sure, young stars that needed to adjust to the college game. And you're starting to see that happen. But I think BYU this week, from what I noticed, I feel like they're playing really smart. They're not like, obviously BYU can jack up a bunch of threes at any time, but they're taking the right ones compared to, I think, some of their opponents. Like that first game against VCU, they're just launching threes right and left when maybe they shouldn't be taking some of those, and some of that was BYU's zone. But I thought BYU has played really smart, and they've taken the right shots, and that's credit to, Kevin's done a heck of a job with the team. But I think a lot of it is just the young kids are settling in, and then you've got vets that they've done this before, and a team with a lot of experience can go far in March Madness.
Yeah. 85, by the way, last two games, 85 points per game, 50% from the field, 41% from three. Tosh, is there a weakness? I look at these games, by the way, and I think these last two games, and by the way, you look at the last few seasons, there always seems to be like a grind offensively, like especially when a certain lineup comes in. We've seen like the offense kind of grind to a halt. It doesn't feel like this team, at least in the tournament, has that guy or that lineup that creates kind of this weakness offensively where they really have to grind for their points. Do you think there's a weakness at all?
No, not lately. I mean, the one that I could point to is Houston shell-shocked us twice. But they had elite guards that just played so physical and just pressured, and that gave us struggles. But guess what? Iowa State does that at a really high level, and we beat them twice. VCU thought they were going to be able to do that. They're really like Houston light and really had incredible defensive metrics, and we still got whatever we wanted with them. I think the biggest change has been at the beginning of the year. At times, we were playing 3 guys that couldn't shoot the 3. And with the development of Jagor and Mag, and now they can shoot it, and I'm excited when they shoot it. All of a sudden, every lineup it seems that we put out there, at most we have 1 guy that can't shoot the 3. And that almost makes BYU unguardable. They're able to run their sets and get somebody a good look every time down the court because it's only our center. And when we play Boscovich, he can.
Yeah.
We have shooters all over the place.
Yeah, and the NBA has shown us that if you put 4 shooters on the floor, even if your 5 can't shoot, like you're a high efficiency offense. And Brian, you and I have talked about Jagor, and Tosh, you and I have talked on the show about Jagor, and I think there's a lot of spotlight that we've kind of shown on him just because of his potential and his draft prospects. He's you know that I've been critical of him, and Brian, you and I have talked. I've been critical of Jagor. And not from a college perspective, because I think he can still make an impact. He's a freshman, right? Like I think as a freshman at BYU, like he's performing well. Like he's I don't think he's a liability per se. But when you look at him as an NBA prospect, I've always been skeptical of his ability to take his game to the next level. And what I've seen in the tournament is the Jagor that I feel like a lot of scouts have seen. As far as his upside, right? Because his weaknesses were his turnovers and his ability to shoot the ball. He's 9 of 21 in his last 2 games, 5 of 13 from 3, 12 rebounds. By the way, his 8 rebounds, 8 assists against Wisconsin is massive. He's got 10 total assists, 26 points in those 2 games. I did want to call out one thing. Cougar Stats on Twitter on X said, Jagor Demmin had 11 points, 8 rebounds, 8 assists. He's only the 9th freshman in NCAA tournament history to reach those marks, and he laid out a couple of those guys in history. Not a lot of them really stand out, but Jalen Suggs from Gonzaga, we obviously know how he's doing in the NBA. Magic Johnson's one of those guys. Jason Kidd's one of those guys. So he's in kind of elite company, right? Like I don't think anyone, even when you look at Jagor's NBA potential, I don't think any of us would have really expected him to perform this well in the tournament. What is allowing him to do that?
Well, I don't claim to know exactly what's going through his mind, but I think there's something to be said of just having experience. Like that's why freshmen don't come in and just dominate right away. I mean, there's a couple that do, obviously Cooper Flag and people like that, but it's hard. It's a huge adjustment going. And this is the same thing I deal with the players that I coach. They're the best of the best, and they got to understand when they go to the college world and the physicality that's there and the speed that's there, you're not just going to go in and dominate. And I think Jagor had to go through that learning curve that everybody has to. And for himself, like for his own like mental confidence, like, you know what, I can hang with this. And I mean, obviously he knew he was really good. He knew he was going to be an NBA player. Yeah. But you almost have to go through it, and I feel like he's kind of like stepping into that, and manning up to it, which, I mean, good for him.
I think it's interesting to look at how he did pre-conference, right? I think he was getting a lot of hype out of conference, and granted, they weren't playing anybody, but specifically they weren't playing against defenses like what they've faced in the Big 12, and I think the Big 12 really kind of, I don't know if exposed is the right word, but really caught him off guard in terms of the physicality, in terms of like they really targeted him. Like we saw a lot of traps. Houston did it a lot. Iowa State did it a lot. Yeah. And that's when he seemed to turn the ball over the most, was when he was getting targeted. Teams were hedging. They were trapping off of screens.
They put quick little guards on him that, I mean, he's taller than them, but they're the quickest guys he's probably gone against in a long time.
And I don't, obviously Wisconsin's not giving him that pressure. They're not a great defensive team. VCU is billed as kind of this pesky defensive team, but they're not, from what I, at least the game that we watched them play against BYU, I wouldn't consider them a physical defense. They're pesky, right? they weren't Houston, they weren't Iowa State. And I think and even then he still turned the ball over 4 times, but he shot the ball well. I think he is thriving against teams who are less physical than what he's seen in the Big 12.
Absolutely. Yep. And it lets him get his game going where he can get to his spots. Like, I love, too, that he has a lot of self-assurance and self-confidence. And credit to Kevin Young to be able to go through a season with 18-year-old for most of it and get him to, in the brightest moment, we're down 5-0 to VCU, and they've got an alley-oop, and he got a travel call on him, but he goes in and drives it and does a little turnaround jumper, hits a big 3. Like, he carried us for a minute in the biggest game of the year, and then again in Wisconsin, he just had no fear. With 2 minutes left, comes down and hits just a dagger 3, and it's like, man, this guy is awesome in that he's, at least if he's going to go down, he's going to go down shooting, and he's not afraid of the moment.
The benefit Jagor's had is that he also has a really deep team around him. I mean, you can't just put your best defender on him because you have Richie Saunders, you have Dallin Hall, you have Foose. I mean, you got a bunch of guys that can score. And oftentimes, I mean, Kevin's running plays for Richie, or even Baker off the bench, is a great scorer. And so you can't just that's the benefit he gets, is that if you're the defense and you got one really good defender, who you putting that guy on? You're probably putting him on Richie right now.
Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. There was another play, I don't know if it's against Wisconsin or VCU, but the VCU guard, I think, scored on Jagor and got in his face, right, as Jagor was inbounding the ball. Jagor kind of gave him a little bit of a shove. I think it was Wisconsin. Yeah. Jagor gave him a little bit of a shove. Literally the next play down the floor, Jagor hit a 3 on him.
And then he's yelling something.
Just like dribbled into a 3 on him. And it was like, that was like the most passionate I think I've seen Jagor all season. And so, you look at that play and you're like, when Jagor gets mad, like, you watch out. You don't want to get him mad, right? Like, I think he's kind of learning how to be kind of this alpha, right? I think he's been kind of too passive all season. He's learning how to get over that.
And that's a symptom of, or a sign of what's happened this whole season with this team. At the beginning of the year, you could out physical BYU and they would fold. It happened against Providence. It happened early many times in Big 12. And as the story goes, I was at this game, but I was not in the locker room. But as the story goes, in the locker room at halftime against UCF at UCF, that Kevin Young told the team, hey, everyone just thinks they can punk us. Like, that's how you beat BYU right now, is you just out physical us and you punk us. Are you going to let them do it? And then BYU came out that second half and really played with their hair on fire. And if you remember, they had to kind of escort the team off because Caba was getting into it with people after the game. But we played physical, and it's been that way really every time since. Like, this team seems like they've got a new persona and guess what is awesome is that in the tournament, for the first time in BYU history, it actually became less physical than what our conference was. And I think that's let BYU be in a really healthy space. And I think that's going to continue. I watched some of these teams we might play coming up, and they're not Houston, and they're not these real physical, beat-you-up teams.
Specifically, I mean, Alabama coming up next. Like, this is going to be a shootout, right? Like, no question. In fact, let's talk about Alabama a little bit later, because I still want to talk about what we saw this last week. And I wanted to kind of shift gears and talk about Richie, because I think it's insane to think of Richie from last year, where he was not even the 6th man, right? Jackson Robinson was 6th man. Richie came off the bench. He did well. Like, he was an efficient player. But I don't think anybody expected Richie to be who he's been, especially in big moments like the Big 12 tournament and the NCAA tournament. 15 of 28 in the last 2 games, 4 of 10 from 3, and that's after a bad shooting night at VCU, right? Or against VCU. 11 rebounds, 41 points. Ted Lasso on Cougar Board, not the Ted Lasso, right? A guy named Ted Lasso. He said, players don't know how to stop Richie. He often scores in unconventional ways. He's creative, persistent, good footwork. I don't see many leading scorers doing it the way he does it. I don't quite know how to describe it. But I think you could describe it probably better than any of us. What has Richie developed? Like, why is he so tough to guard?
Well, I was going to say it surprised everybody except probably Richie would be my guess, because I think Richie, I don't know what his off-season workout regimen was like, but I think Richie probably worked on his game and willed himself to this point, as part of it at least. I think Kevin Young has done a really good job at putting him in good spots, which is another piece to this, because there's a lot of teams that I've seen that have a great player, and then they say, okay, here you go, here's the ball at the top of the key, go ISO ball, right? And that can work. I mean, you saw that with what's his name at Wisconsin was doing that.
Tonje,
right?
Tonje.
Which, he's a heck of a player. I mean, the fact that he can do that. But Kevin I thought has done a really nice job at mixing up how he's getting Richie the ball off of handoffs. If you've noticed, a lot of that stuff where he's a screen and then a handoff, I think is really advantageous to Richie. So I think a great player and then put in the right spots can really, really succeed. And then, once again, you can't just key on Richie. I mean, BYU is deep. I mean, how are you going to stop Foose? It's like very few teams have really been able to stop him. So you give the ball to Foose, and now, boom, a kick out, and there's Richie. Or Jagor, you got to key on Jagor. Okay, they run the little Spain action where there's a high ball screen. Jagor gets in the lane. Somebody's got to help.
Yeah.
Jagor's setting Richie up really, really nice. So I think it's a combination of things, but, I mean, either way, Richie's been unbelievable. I mean, isn't he the most improved in the Big 12?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he
Maybe
was
in the country.
First team Big 12 too.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, I don't know if we're overhyping Richie, because, as you said, he's got teammates that are setting him up too, right? Like, I think you put him on last year's team, he's still probably be really good, but maybe not as good. And so the question then is, like, where does this is the first Sweet 16 team since 2011, right? When they had Jimmer. And you can make the case, he's obviously the best player on the team. You could make the case that he is, granted he's not getting the same hype as Jimmer, but maybe as efficient or impactful, the most impactful player at least since Jimmer, right? Like, is that a fair case to be made?
I think that he is in the top 3 greatest basketball players to ever play at BYU.
Danny, Jimmer.
Yeah, there's no one else.
It's a big call right
I would love for you guys to bring up a name that you think is better than him. And if you're 70 years old, you got, what's his name? Kosic.
Yeah.
Who was awesome, I hear. Yeah. But no one's ever seen him play, and so I'm not dogging on him. Great story, great player. But in the modern, filmed on TV era, I mean, there's some ballers. The Haas brothers. You've got guys that have gone pro, but they did that in such a weaker conference, and I hate to be the conference snob, but at the level that Richie's been playing against and with the efficiencies, it's not like he's a chucker. He's playing very efficient. And then being the best player on a team that got us to the Sweet 16, the only names that I'll even listen to that might be better than Richie are Ainge and Jimmer. I think he's solidified himself in the top 3 greatest BYU basketball player ever.
Brian?
I don't know if I'm going to go that far.
Who would you put ahead of him? I was actually thinking, as you're talking, I'm thinking
gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to think of all
Hoffa, Lee
I just
Kamard.
you think of people that went to the NBA, right? I mean, yeah. How do you judge the greatest of all time? You're definitely going to think of people that played in the NBA.
Judge by impact. Just impact on their team. Maybe versatility, because I think Richie's one of the most versatile, right?
Well, to Tosh's point, the props you have to give him is, yes, BYU's in the Big 12. BYU's never been in the Big 12 before, and he's done it at an elite level in the Big 12. And BYU's in the Sweet 16. How many times has BYU been in the Sweet 16, right? So those two things alone, he has to be in the discussion, no doubt. But I don't know if I'd go that far.
Okay. When I've talked to my son on this, and I brought up, I love the Haas brothers. I love Lee Kamard. I was college friends. I had multiple class friends as strong, but we would study together, me and Playstead.
Friends.
Yeah. There's been great guys, and I'm not faulting these guys. A lot of it was the team around him, but they would go to the tournament, and we would all, them included, get our hearts broken.
Yeah.
And so the fact that my boy Richie, who I've never met, but I love him forever, has given me and my sons an incredible weekend. I have just risen him to, he
deserves
awesome.
the praise he's getting. He absolutely does.
Yeah, hard not to cheer for him. And that said, then you look at like you said, this first time they made the Sweet 16 since 2011. Where does this and it's not over yet, right? Like, where does this season rank among best seasons that you've witnessed? At least I think 2011 obviously is the best. 2000, early 2000s, I think had some good seasons, but I think this is the best team that, and I actually want to compare it to that 2011 team because I think Jimmer was great, Jackson Emery was great, and then they had a lot of role player guys, right? This team feels deeper. It feels like there's just not like, because when Jimmer came out or when Jackson came out, which was very rare, like for like 2 minutes a game, right? It felt like there wasn't really anybody that could, it was just kind of like, let's try and keep our lead, or let's try and just like hold down the fort for a little bit. This is a team that's so deep that Dallin comes in, Jagor comes out, Richie comes out, Nell comes in. Like, there's just not a weak lineup. Like I said earlier in the show, like, this team feels so deep that, I feel probably more confident in BYU's ability to beat Alabama this week than I think I did against, with BYU's ability to beat Florida in 2011. And that probably would have changed had Brandon Davies been available to play in that game. But I just, it's so deep that one guy can have an off night, even if that guy's Richie Saunders, and they can still win a game. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is this team deeper than 2011?
Yes.
Is this team? Do you
so.
feel more confident about this team in the Sweet 16 than you did then?
I do. I think they could beat Alabama. I really do think they. I think if you had put a gun to my head and say who's going to win, I would say BYU is going to beat Alabama.
Really?
I really actually think that. And I think they're a deeper team to what you're saying. Obviously, there's no Jimmer, and Emery was super underrated defensively, and those role players were pretty dang good. Abuo and
yeah, right. I'm not saying they're scrubs.
Was Chris Miles on that team? Shout out to good old Chris Miles. I mean, Chris Miles could defend, man. I mean, that guy can play.
I actually don't think he was on the 2011 team. He was Hartsock. Hartsock would have been.
Well, and
Hartsock too. I mean,
they had freshman Kyle Collinsworth on one of those Jimmer teams.
Chris is on the
earlier one.
Earlier one, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying they had scrubs. They had great players. Jonathan Tavernari, right? He was on the team too.
Yeah, JT. I mean,
great shooters. Like he had great, and I think that's part of what made Jimmer great too. Is like, granted he had the most gravity on the team, but he had other guys that could score, which they had gravity as well. They took defenders off of Jimmer as much as they could. So
No, this team's deeper. I would say this team's deeper though. I mean, you have guys off the bench that could very well start another Big 12 team.
Yeah,
I would think. Don't you think?
For sure.
Dallin.
Yeah.
I'm going to be biased to Dallin, but
we've got Cannon Catchings, who's not even playing.
Yeah.
And he would be starting at a lot of even Power 4 programs. And so, this team is really deep.
Yeah, and we could talk about reasons why Cannon's not playing, and that's probably a discussion for later, probably after the season. But you're right. I mean, Cannon is still a projected draft pick, maybe not first round, probably not lottery. Does he come back to BYU next year? Who knows? But you've got a guy as talented as Cannon that would probably be playing on most WCC teams when BYU's in the WCC, not even getting minutes, and they're still playing 10 guys without him.
Yeah.
So that said, Alabama's up next and potentially Duke after them. But you've got to beat an Alabama team that's number 1 in scoring, number 2 in field goals made. They run the floor probably better than anybody in the country. Like they are a high tempo, high volume offense. They're not super efficient from 3. They're very efficient from 2. So they get inside and they score when they get inside. Very similar to Wisconsin. I would say Wisconsin on steroids. In terms of offensive production. But BYU's got one of the best offenses in the country. In fact, I think I saw, it was Jeff Borzello on Twitter said, Alabama versus BYU offensive efficiency. Season-long schedule adjusted. Alabama is 4th for offensive efficiency. BYU is 8th. In league play, Alabama's 1st in the SEC. BYU is 3rd in the Big 12. Alabama is 9th nationally since February 15th. BYU is 2nd. since February 15th, second in the country in offensive efficiency. And he says first to 90 in Newark wins on Thursday. I think it might be first to 100. 90 might not get it. So I think the over-under, by the way, is like 175.
Yeah, it's
so
high.
if you're betting, it's not high enough. I don't think it's high enough, right?
I mean,
like
that's still 87
it's like 90 to 85 or something.
Yeah, that's a lot of points.
I mean, it is, and it'd be but I think for this type of game where they're going to both be running up and down the floor, like BYU doesn't slow the ball down at all either. Like if they get a good 3-point shot, they're taking it. You may see someone hit 100 in this game.
Well, these teams are also not bad defensively though, too. I mean, you're playing. They didn't get to where you don't get to the Sweet 16 without guarding.
Yep.
And BYU's zone has slowed teams down. I mean, I don't know if it'll slow Alabama down or if they even go to it. I think that was maybe VCU specific, but that really made VCU have to move the ball and slow the game down a little bit.
I think that you're onto something there. That because Alabama's strength is they like he said, they're leading the country more or less in 2-point field goal possession. They're not great at threes. And so I hate Utah. BYU is going to try to get Alabama to shoot threes. And I think the zone, they're going to see if that's working to get them to chuck up threes.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, BYU has one of the worst, at least in the conference, one of the worst 3-point defenses in the country because they go under so many Why do they go under so many screens, Brian?
I don't know.
It drives me nuts. And I get that I'm just a casual observant fan. But they go under every screen. And, against teams that can shoot well from three, Houston, right? It killed them. It kills them, right? Yeah. But I think against a team like Alabama who's trying to get inside, they are more efficient inside. Foose might struggle defensively. Well, I don't think Keita's going to struggle that much.
It plays on that player's pride. If someone's going under the screen, like you feel like your friends are going to make fun of you if you don't shoot that up. And so I think that's a way BYU can win this is get Alabama to shoot threes. Because how Alabama is leading the country in twos is dunks and layups. Like they drive and they lay it up or they throw an oop to – they have very athletic bigs that just – or alley-oop cities, similar to how we play with Keita. And so if BYU can take that away, which is a hard ask, like that's how they can make Alabama play a different game.
Yeah.
What'll be interesting to me is Alabama starts two bigs, and you saw this with Wisconsin. Wisconsin played two basically 7-footers, didn't they, if I remember right? So it's just interesting to see the different teams you play. Houston, you're playing 4 guards and 1 big kind of. I mean, Houston's got a 4-man that's fairly big, but not 2 7-footers. You see it with Michigan, too. Michigan plays 2 7-footers. And I thought that might come into a factor, but BYU did a good job. BYU sometimes playing a guard as a 4-man. Like a mag might be a 4. Mm-hmm. Jagor's kind of like a 4 and a point guard because he's 6'8". But so it'll be interesting to see if Alabama's going to win on the glass because that's where they could have an advantage when you have 2 bigs in there. That could be a factor. Really, the guy they're probably keying on is Sears, the point guard, who's averaging, I think, 18 a game or something. Yeah. So that may be another reason you go zone is to try to stop him. But I don't know. It'd be interesting.
This episode is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptiv will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptiv is why. Visit goaptiv.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787. Mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's goaptiv.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787. Terms and conditions apply. Get home field advantage with Aptiv. Why should you have to choose between style and repping your team? Wooden Grail is bridging the gap between modern fashion and college fandom. Their hats and apparel are made with premium materials like suede and corduroy, featuring bold, unique designs that let you show off your team pride without sacrificing your look. Whether you're at the game or out on the town, Wooden Grail lets you do both. Check them out at woodengrail.com and step up your fan game. Use code CougarBoard for free shipping on any order. BYU, by the way, is 21-1. When they score 80 points or more. Alabama is 22-2 when they score 85 or more. So I think both hit those numbers. The question is who steps up defensively, similar to what we saw at Wisconsin. We didn't even talk about. We should probably talk about the flagrant. What do you think about the flagrant against Dawson?
I don't know. I don't think Dawson was trying to do that. I mean, that's kind of what they're saying with the flagrant, aren't they? That he did it on purpose.
Yes, I think that's the problem I have with the call, is that the rule says that. And by the way, it's any contact to the groin. So once there's any contact to the groin during a live ball. By the way, I don't think it was during a live ball. I'm pretty sure
that was the best point that you brought up that no one else has.
Yeah.
Is I think it was after the whistle.
Yeah.
Which that changes the whole definition of how it should have been a technical at that point.
It's literally a different sub rule. Right.
Yeah.
It's a technical flagrant, not a personal flagrant.
Yes.
When it becomes a dead ball. So I thought it was a dead ball. That was one point, and then the other point was, yes, there's groin. It's a groin. It's contact to the groin. I'm saying groin too much, and it feels uncomfortable. And so that there's literally like a very specific rule that if there's contact to the groin area, it has to clearly be accidental. And that's up to the ref to decide. If it's clearly accidental, then it's not a flagrant 2. But how can you determine that it's not clearly accidental when there's two guys that are already pressed up against him and he's just trying to break through them?
Well, the guy that got number 11, whose testicles almost won Wisconsin the game, his defense was hilarious.
He wasn't even
he's
defending
so casual and hips in.
His hands are down. He looked like Ashton Genty, right?
He looked like when I watched second grade basketball, how he was defending that trap. I'm confused still at what he was doing. But my second point, though, on the other side of things, as a BYU fan, I was mad about that call. But if I was a Wisconsin fan and they called nothing there, I would have been irate. It was some real force, elbow right to the crotch in a key point that if I'm a fan of the other team, they have to call something there. But flagrant 2 seemed like an overkill and to eject the guy.
That's what I'm saying is that's if you meet that definition, it's an automatic flagrant 2.
Yeah.
Right? There's no if it's less violent, then it's a flagrant 1 and it becomes like a subjective call. It's if there's groin, and if it's not clearly accidental, then it has to be flagrant 2, right? There's no middle ground.
That's
and
why
I think it needs to be redefined.
That's why your point's so interesting, is that it wasn't in that box because it was after the whistle when the contact happened. I'm just hoping, though, that this strikes some fear in Alabama. I hope he's just polishing his elbows, during warm-ups, and maybe it gives us a little more spacing. But
did you guys see the video of Dawson in the locker room? By the way, I love that they captured that. And we had Tyson Hutchins on, who's over there, who's over BYU's creative strategy team, and that's very much like the foresight of his team to be able, not necessarily to see Dawson's ejected, let's put a camera in the locker room. They already had a camera in the locker room to get the celebration at the end of the game. And the foresight that they had to capture that celebration, I love that it just so happened to catch Dawson watching. And that went viral, right? I think that probably went more viral than any other highlight in that game. Was
correct.
Dawson's reaction to Mags. We haven't even talked about Mag's defense. But Dawson's reaction to Mag, shutting down Tanjay at the end of the game, I think that was fantastic to watch. Do you see a lot of that with players? Granted, you don't have a lot of players probably get ejected and put into the locker room, but what's kind of the behind the scenes feel? We get to see the emotions of players on the court. What are players like a Dawson Baker, like a Richie Saunders, off the floor? And granted, you didn't coach those guys, but Dallin and the guys that you did coach.
You mean as human beings off the court?
Yeah, it's. Granted, we see the strategy team has shown us a lot of behind the scenes, which has been awesome to see. I think fans crave more of that. What happens kind of behind the scenes in the locker room? What's going on there?
These are all great young men. Just great human beings, and a lot of guys are. And I would say the thing people don't realize, I think, is that a lot of these guys get a ton, especially the top guys, get a ton of attention at a really young age. Think about AJ, what he's going through, AJ DeBansa, and the attention he's getting. And, you remember what you were like as an 18-year-old kid or a 17-year-old kid or a 16-year-old kid. It's I wouldn't have known how to handle that, right? And then now they're throwing millions of dollars at you. So I think that's one of the hardest things for some of these guys is the expectations people put on them to perform at such a young age in their life. And I mean, shoot, I'm dealing with it at 40 on how to perform in my job, and I don't know how to handle it. And so I think that's one thing people don't understand is the amount of stress and anxiety that can put on you as a young basketball player that I think should be talked about when we're talking about off the court stuff.
Yeah, love it. I love that perspective.
I love how much Baker cared. I think that fans could relate to it because we were all doing the same thing in our living rooms, and to see a player pacing and shouting at a TV, it was really relatable. I also have to say, I love that Baker had his best game of the season when the lights were shining brightest. I would argue that many on this team, Mag may have had his best defensive performance, which is hard to say when the guy scored 37.
Yeah.
But he's a terror for these teams. He makes them work so hard, and I love that these guys are not afraid of the moment.
Yeah, and exactly to your point, we called out Jagor, we called out Richie, you called out Mag. Everybody on this team, at least during the tournament, has performed better than I think anyone could have expected. And that's why they're in the Sweet 16. And hopefully they can continue to do that. It does not feel like they're a paper tiger, right? We're so used to BYU teams being paper tigers and having one guy that does really well, but he gets shut down in the tournament and they lose in the first or second round. We've seen that so many times. This does not feel like that team. And I feel, like you said, I'm maybe not bullet to my head I picked BYU, but I do feel pretty good about their ability to win.
I mean, BYU's playing like a 2 seed.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Brian Swindlehurst, Tosh Mackintosh, thank you so much for joining me today. I love the 3-man crew. Let's try and get it together again. For now, though, this is the Loyal Cougars podcast. BYU taking on Alabama this week. We'll talk about it next week. We'll see you then.